You're a real slave driver.
I'm hungry. I only had a smoothie today.
That's all? You didn't have any breakfast? Mm-mm. Well, there's your problem.
No time.
Come on.
No, seriously, no time.
I even bought you milk.
Oh, thanks.
Like real cow milk. Because I'm that kind of guy.
Talking more, yeah.
Talking. You guys are talking.
We're talking
Oh, really?
A lot of talkers.
I would agree with that.
This podcast is called Erase the Filter.
Erase the filter.
Erase the filter.
We are talking about creativity, the year of creativity coming up, 2022. Where do you find inspiration to be creative?
Man, I feel like over the last 2 years, because of COVID, I have had a very hard time getting inspired.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, not to the same extent as I feel like I normally would have. I mean, I get inspired by the people of the candy factory every day and the cool things that they're doing. I'm Ann Kirby, and I'm a kick-ass female entrepreneur. I'm a founder. I'm a musician. I'm a graphic designer. The Candy Factory is a co-working space in Lancaster City, and it's a community of professionals from all different backgrounds coming together to work alongside each other, share knowledge. I'm inspired by design and interior design, and so I am inspired by the places I go. And I think that's one of the challenges that I've experienced with COVID is that not being able to go to the places that I normally would have gone to or traveling, because then I'm not capturing ideas. I'm not seeing new spaces which inspire me. So it's been a little more challenging than normal.
Where have you gone specifically that inspired creativity?
I think Chicago is one of my go-to places when I think of like creative cities, because there's just so much art everywhere. The architecture, the public art, it just oozes creativity, and I love it.
Anywhere else that you can think of off the top of your head?
When it comes to actual physical places, I love going to Winterthur, which is a beautiful old DuPont estate, Henry DuPont, and it's in Delaware, Brandywine Valley. It's gorgeous. And the grounds are just so beautiful. And the nice thing is he believed in natural gardening, and so there's always something in bloom, even in the winter. And so every season is unique. And he had one of the largest collections of Americana art. And so he built his home, became a museum. And you can tour the facility. And we, normally get a membership every year, so we can go down whenever we want. And that's a very inspiring space. It's just being out in nature and seeing also this constructed gardens that are natural.
2019 was the year of action. 2020 was supposed to be the year of rhythm, got completely fucked up. Became the year of chaos. 21 had to be the year of recovery, even though nobody really got as far along as they had hoped.
Yeah.
But the creative stuff is starting to come back.
Yeah.
Meaning I was stifled, very stifled in the second half of 2020 and the first half of 2021. Like, you know how with the pandemic, artists seem to do one of two things. They either went all in.
Yeah. Or all out.
Or all out.
Yeah.
Most of my friends that I talked to about it went all out. Like just everybody was just sort of stymied and couldn't do it. So this fall, I've started to feel that loosen up.
Yeah.
Things are starting to come back. And so I said, you know what? 2022 has to be the year of creativity. I have to bring that back.
Yeah. Creativity is such a part of my DNA that it's hard for me not to come up with stuff. Now, the hard part is just getting the shit out of my head and putting it into some digestible format. So there's always, I think to me, there's always an inspiration, but I can see how a lot of people have gotten sidetracked over the past couple of years, because when I get into a creative space, it's like nothing else exists. Like time stops, everything stops. It's just like, heads down, banging out stuff. But when you're being distracted by all the stuff going around you and the worries and the concerns, and it's really hard to kind of tap into that and let it out. So it just kind of gets blocked. So it's just, for me, inspiration is not the problem. It's actually a lot more about the discipline of doing it.
I'm Jose Johnson, and I guess I'm a creator in all aspects of my personal and business life. I'm a musician, a composer, arranger. I host a music podcast called The Trumpet Gurus Hang, and I'm an author and a coach and a consultant and speaker, and everything I do is kind of focused around taking ideas and repackaging them and coming up with new concepts and then presenting them to the public in one format or another.
My musical output is, just one aspect. So, whether it's writing a book or whether it's, creating video content or anything. I mean, my mind is always kind of churning with ideas. And so to me, I don't tie myself down to the only way I can be creative is to write a song or to write a book or anything like that. It's just creative is just being creative. It's creating something out of nothing. And so I always feel like I can be creative because there's always, some thought or concept or idea or inspiration that hits me. And it's just, how can that – is this going to be the lyric to a song or is this going to be the theme of a video?
I have to be inspired by real life events and not have my art be self-referential. So like when I was in college, I was a religion major. When I switched to being an English major, that felt too self-referential. It was like I'm not getting enough other material to bring into my writing. Now, it was helpful in other ways, but it wasn't particularly inspiring. I need to be in the world. I need to be experiencing life, but also, I need to be just present in my body and in my life. And the biggest thing that interferes with my creative flow is just like unmanaged stress. So I'm Jessica Smucker. I am a writer. Songwriting is my primary genre these days, but I'm also a poet and creative nonfiction writer. Sometimes an idea comes to me and it's so clear, and I just know that I'm going to be able to sit down, and if I make the time, I'll be able to chip away at it until I'm finished. I'd say 95% of my process of like trying to get into the creative zone is just finding that idea and what it is. Once it's there, I can go. I have to be focused on something outside of myself. If I sit down in front of a computer or in front of my piano and I'm like, well, I have to write a song now. I'm a writer. I have to write. That doesn't work at all. And then also sometimes, you know that you're in a space in life that should be inspiring. I remember when I had kids, I had tons of people tell me like, oh, this is going to change the way you write. You're going to be so inspired all the time. And while that has been true in certain ways, it's not something you can force. You just have to sort of wait, and the first few years of having little kids is not particularly inspiring, even though you can take those moments and look back on them or step outside of them and find them really inspiring. It's not sometimes just having the idea is not enough. You have to be present and have the idea at the same time. When I was younger, I felt entirely dependent on like the muse or the energy or like, I dropped out of college twice because I would be trying to do my classwork and then like an idea would seize upon me and I'm like, I have to catch this while it is happening. And over time, learning to trust that like the idea is going to come, and if you don't have the time for it, it's gonna circle back. It's not this thing you have to chase quite that hard. So I think maturing as an artist, I think often involves like finding the ways that you trust yourself and your process as an artist, and that's been like definitely in the last 5 years. I would say I've just really settled into that. I don't have to be in a hurry, and some of it does have to do with like once you have a body of work behind you, when I was in my 20s and I was just starting everything, I was like, I just want to get published. I just want to make an album. I just want to, like finish this. And there's a really nice sort of rest that you can take when you've been doing it for long enough that it's like, okay, I don't have to prove anything. I just have to keep making the art.
Most of my inspiration comes from the distance that exists between myself and most often something in nature, right? Something that I visually see, the river, the bridge that goes across the river, the lake, the trees, and most of it being, for me, a way of finding out who I am in my own geography. And what I mean by that is if you've ever looked at, let's say, an escarpment's a piece of land where it suddenly stops and then drops off, and there may be a wearing below the escarpment where you see where water or wind had been, and sometimes there's a tree on the top of the escarpment kind of trying to hold on desperately to whatever soil it's got. I think there's places in me that are escarpments.
Oh, that's
places where my life goes, to use Robert Bly's word, just so far, where they stop, where they drop off, maybe where compromise exists, the person that I am being challenged. I'm Tom Johnson-Medland, and I identify most, I think, with writing and poetry. Another really big geological feature that I really like is an alluvial fan, which is along a mountain. You have all these smaller little foothills that kind of come off of the mountain. And it comes off because wind or water erodes soil down. And as it continues to go down, it starts to build up another mountain abutted up against it.
Yeah, it sort of piles up at the bottom.
Yeah, almost like a delta, but with dirt. Right?
Okay.
So that there are places in our life where pieces of us just wash off and they build things around us, like family, friends, community, that kind of stuff. So one of the things I realized that I needed was to be able to develop some other piece to my creativity so that when that thing happens that says, ain't got no words today, right? I could do something else. Getting back to nature, I see that as a vantage point. You climb way up top of a mountain, and when you look down over that mountain into the valley, you can see where things are at. Sometimes the things that you're looking for aren't there, and so you've got to go with what is there. So I started doing watercolors again. I did that when I was 18, went to art school as a kid, actually from, I think, 15 through 17. Stopped around 18 and decided I'd pick it up, unbeknownst to me, right before we had the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
For me, while I was trying to find words for the pandemic, I just would do painting.
Just gave you some release to open the flow.
A different way, a different vantage point to look at life, right? So like in writing, there are whole sets of processes in place. Same with watercolor. And one of the ones that I never realized that exists in writing, but I felt it and lived it, was what happens in a watercolor when you get to a certain point where it's not going the way you want it. And you have to choose, am I going to destroy this, throw it out, or rebuild it? Right? Same thing happens with words too. So having that kind of parallel thing to do helps me out a lot.
Now I know what podcasts are.
Erase the filter.
I recently finished reading 2 memoirs. Flunk Start, Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology by Sands Hall was one of them. I had the pleasure of working with Sands on a few projects over the years. In fact, she did a reading from that memoir for episode 3 of this podcast. I also finished Huckster's Son by Randy Buxner. He's a good friend, a collaborator, and a contributor to this podcast. I loved both of them. It's fascinating to learn the history of somebody in a context that can be so radically different from the context in which you know them. There's obviously a lot of recollection in a memoir. The author has to piece together memories and stories from sometimes a very distant past. Sometimes it's sentimental, sometimes nostalgic, sometimes it's just working through a bunch of unresolved shit. Well, this month I've been thinking about this podcast, Erase the Filter. There's been a lot of looking back lately. I think there's always been a bit of nostalgia involved with it. Perhaps it's part of getting older, reaching milestones like turning 50. There's a ton of source material in the rear view. It's a lot of stories, adventures, hits and misses, home runs, and fuck-ups. Hopefully there's some wisdom, some accomplishments, ultimately more good than bad. As I look back on the looking back I've done on this podcast, I realize that at times I'm making little mini audio memoirs, artifacts that will someday be old and dusty, with stories from even further back that will soon be ancient history. It's an audio journal capturing a slice of what I experience, what strikes me, what I ponder, what I'm reflecting on each month, with a splash of people around me, people I love and respect, who help make this life interesting and who inspire me to create. This man-made construct called a calendar indicates that things are starting over again, and it could be a good time to reset. It's a fresh start. It's a new year. This year of creativity, finding ideas, being motivated to document them and then act on them and execute the idea into something that didn't exist before. The conversations with the 4 artists on this podcast gave me 4 more perspectives on creativity. Perspectives that I will take into the year of creativity and execute my own ideas on this podcast, through my work, and throughout my life. Ideas are the foundation for creativity. If we're lucky enough to be inspired and we find the ideas that we fall in love with, well, then what?
Yeah, my idea process begins with writing it down. So I call them word seeds or poem seeds, right? So if something comes up, if I'm looking at the river and all of a sudden I say, I do speak a lot to myself out loud. So if I particularly say something jazzy to myself at one point, I think that's got the sound of a poem seed or a word seed in it, then I'll write it down. And I tend to get back to those things pretty quickly.
Okay.
Sometimes it'll be after I hear myself say something, like I'll do a little research to see who else has said something like that, what other poets have looked at that idea, what other artists have pictured that, and what's the distance between them and myself. What's the distance between myself and that thing that I wrote down, and then try to find out what lives between it. Like where did that set of words come from?
What tends to motivate me is when I see obvious gaps in something. And whether that be, access to childcare or access to a cool venue or access to a place to work around other cool people. When I see gaps, I like to be able to fill those gaps. And it's a motivator because I want to benefit from it. Right? So I benefit from the Candy Factory. I benefit from the venue space that we have. I benefit from the media studio. So not only do the people around me and my members benefit, I benefit.
I recently started, and this has mostly been for like my writing stuff, for creating content for video productions and consulting gigs and that sort of stuff. I have a document. I have a Google Doc. And I have it starred, so whenever I open up, I could just immediately go right to that, and it's just ideas, quotes and ideas, and I just I'll be driving and I'll get an idea, and if I can stop at a light and type it in, or I'll use voice memo or whatever.
Safely, of course.
Yeah, don't do this at home. And I just put the ideas down that way, and if I'm like scrolling through the internet, and I find an article or a statement or a video or something that kind of inspires me and I want to dive into it deeper, I'll do the same thing, or I'll copy the URL and stick it in that document, and then I can go back later and look at it for the inspiration.
With songwriting and with poems, it's easier because you're doing something that's very short and contained. I'm working on a collection of essays, and I have 3 or 4 different essays that I've had in some sort of state for about 6 years. I'm not very motivated to finish them, which I like. I like that I'm motivated to keep digging at what are they about. But that's something that I don't know what I'm going to name my year next year. But it is something that I am looking forward to digging into. When I'm working on a larger scale project, how do I find not just the motivation? Because I don't want all the motivation to be about finishing it. It's sort of about showing up for it. Motivation is something I've also given myself a lot of grace about in the last few years. I don't have to always be working. I don't have to always be creative. If if I have entire months of my year where I'm focused more on my family and my other responsibilities, like that can feel okay, because I know that like in the larger picture of my life, being an artist is what grounds me, and I'm always going to find my way back to it.
Thank you, Anne, Jose, Jessica, and Tom, for sharing your thoughts. The year of creativity is upon us. May yours be filled with inspiration, motivation, and execution. This is Jason Mundock. Thanks for listening to Erase the Filter. Show notes can be found at erasethefilter.com, and if you have feedback about the show, feel free to email me at jmundok, JMUNDOK, @gmail.com. And always remember,
Open your mind.
Be yourself.
erase the filter.